Yeah, so we're going to learn about relationship building. Before we get started, though, I want to share a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Mexico, like the person who introduced me shared with you. And I came here only to learn English for 4 months. And I've been here for 16 years, still learning English and still practicing. But one of the things that happens when you move from another place, particularly when you move to a place where you don't know a lot of people, is that you try to connect with new people. In my case, I didn't speak English, so I was trying to always find people who spoke Spanish. I was at the university where I was taking English classes, and during the night, I was a caterer. So I worked serving people at parties and other things. One thing that happened working in the service industry, and this probably can be something that a lot of immigrants can recognize, is that when you work in the service industry, sometimes you feel invisible. You feel like nobody is seeing you. Because you might put a plate in front of a person, the person doesn't acknowledge you. You might prepare the food for the person doesn't know you're back there. You might wash their dishes, clean up their plate, their rooms. Nobody sees you. Sometimes you feel invisible. And I felt invisible often. So when I was on campus and I heard someone speak Spanish, I always try to make eye contact. Hearing Spanish through a crowd for me, it's like a superpower. I could be here, and there could be someone speaking Spanish far away from me, and it breaks through the noise. I just hear it. So I am kind of trained to find the people who speak Spanish. Because in that way, that's when I found community. So in the university, when I heard someone speak Spanish, it was immediately like I perked up. So one day, sitting at the cafeteria, I remember getting ready I was going to get ready to go to work. There was someone who was speaking Spanish, and I immediately tried to make eye contact. It was a worker in the cafeteria. His name was Gregorio, but I called him Goyo. And Goyo came to me because I started smiling, had the biggest smile in the world. I wanted to say hi to him. He comes and I started asking questions. He was from Mexico City. He was wearing his uniform, but he was on break for a lunch break. And he told me that he'd been in the United States for over 20 years. He was moreno, like me, had green eyes and gray hair. And I remember that the first thing that I asked him is, how long have you been working here? And he confessed something that he probably should have not. He told me he was a salter. Anybody knows what a salter is? No? Salters are people who work for unions, who sometimes enter a workplace to work there and then unionize the people inside. So he was working in the cafeteria to try to organize other workers to fight for their rights at the university. So he asked me if I knew what that was. I didn't know anything about it. So he asked me if I could have a conversation with him. He didn't say, let's have a one-on-one. What he said was, can I hear more about what it feels to be an immigrant student in the United States? Nobody had ever asked me that. So I said yes. I was like, absolutely, let's talk. He sat down, and we started talking about the situation of workers in the university. I didn't know that these workers were mistreated, they were making minimum wage. And I immediately thought, oh, wow, there's a lot of learning here. So he invited me to go meet with this university president. They were going to have a meeting with him. And I said, sure, let's go. So I went with him. A few weeks later, he asked me to put together a meeting at the university with my friends. So I recruited other people from the classroom. And I actually became what they called in that campaign a team leader and created my own team. Actually, a few months later, Goyo recruited me to go to Jackson, Mississippi and learn how to do community organizing. Goyo changed the trajectory of my life because he asked me that he would ask me to sit down and hear more about myself. That was something that was for me very powerful, that someone could just in a matter of 45 minutes change your life. He sat down and listened to me. He sat down and asked me questions. But also, more than anything, he cared about me. He asked me questions about things that I wanted in the world, that I wanted to see, that I wanted to learn. And then he followed up. He kept in touch. Back then we didn't have, well, we had MySpace, I think, even though I didn't use it. But he used to call me all the time and text me all the time to tell me how things were. Today, I want to talk to you about what Goyo did really well, and then see if we can collectively learn some of the best practices about how you could change other people's lives' trajectory too, and empower them to do more things. Now I have one-on-ones myself, and sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're bad. Just a few weeks ago, I had a really bad one-on-one. because I was so nervous sitting down with this person that I started talking a lot. So because I was talking so much, I didn't ask the right questions. The person didn't really care about me or what I was doing. That at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting, the person wasn't engaged at all. I walked out of there bummed. I was like, oh my God, after 16 years of doing this work, I'm still bumming. I'm still bumming meetings, but I'm still doing it. But it's also a great opportunity because we continue to learn. We continue to learn this craft. So today, I have a few goals to share with you. The first one is learn how relationships grow movements. This is the essence of movements, relationships. In the Obama campaign, they did a survey at the end of the 2008 campaign, and they asked people why they kept coming back in volunteering. And people said that they came first because of the candidate, but they kept coming back because of the people. So relationship building is like the glue that keeps people in movements. The second one, identify the different types of one-on-one conversations. There's not only one. Goyo, at that time, did what we call an introductory one-on-one, or a relationship building one-on-one, but there are all other types, and I'm going to talk about those too. And finally, we're going to learn how to make hard asks and best practices of follow-up. Hard asks is something that you hear a lot on the organizing lingo, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. These are some concepts that I want to learn, and this is just like a teacher. I like to share the concepts, so at the end of the day, you can hold me accountable to see if I actually kind of share those concepts with you. The first one is going to be the difference between private and public relationships. The different types of one-on-ones. 10-70-20 practice. So what does it mean, 10-70-20? That's the way that I think about the time that I spend on a one-on-one, and I'm going to share more about that. What's a hard ask? But I'm also going to give you a little bit of history about relationship building and organizing, and the power of role-playing and coaching, because we're going to do some of that. Transformational relationships are important in everyone's lives. And I'm not talking about sometimes transformational relationships are positive, but sometimes transformational relationships are also negative. How many of us have ever participated in an organization where we know that if one person is not in that room, that organization falls apart? Have we ever been in a meeting where like one person runs the show, and if that person is not there, no one gets anything done? Right? Are we nodding our heads? Or organizations where you walk in where everybody's in charge and nothing gets done, right? Like everybody has ideas and there's no kind of leadership in the room, right? Transformational relationships are those who are actually able to meet the needs of everyone who are involved in an organization. But for those of us who have many friends or who have many acquaintances, there is a difference between private and public relationships. Private relationships are usually one-to-one person, right? That doesn't mean that the relationship, by the way, has a purpose for something else. It might be that I have a relationship with someone who is my neighbor, right? And that relationship is private because that person lives next to me, and every time I get out of my house, I say hi to that person, right? Or my mother, right? I always measure what a big good relationship I have with my mother, or the many times I call her or she calls me. It's very different. But we're always communicating, right? Public relationships are groups of people, or even two individuals, who have a common purpose. They want to accomplish something. Okay? So the difference is that the public relationships are people who are coming together to accomplish something together. Okay? That doesn't mean something good or something bad. It's just something, right? So if I say I want to run for office and I'm going to ask a bunch of people to vote for me, those relationships are public, right? I might not invite those people to my house every day, right? Or I might not call them if I'm in the hospital, right? But I might call them if I need them to turn out to do an action. I might call them to turn out or support me in any way. Private and public relationships are different. And it's important for us to know what is the difference between those. Sometimes in efforts and campaigns, we think that we are building private relationships with everyone. And it's unsustainable. There are organizers who have relationships with everyone in a private manner, and they can reach more people because they always have to take care, supposedly, of the people that they're building relationships with. That is not the role of an organizer. That is not the role of a person who is engaging others. The role is to make sure that you identify people who are going to become the leaders of the future, the people who you're going to support for them to accomplish what they want to see in their lives. So one thing that I always say is that if you want to build private relationships, that's great. I have a lot of private relationships in my friendships, right? But if we have public relationships, are those that have a purpose. I have a joke that I always tell my friends, and I always say, the difference between private and public relationships is when you are going to turn out a bunch of people that same day, I might not call my best friend because my best friend probably won't show up, to be honest, because he doesn't care about that, right? But I will call who I know will show up. Those are the public relationships that I have. There are many ways to build relationships, by the way. Many ways, okay? And I'm going to talk about 3 particular ones today. One way is trainings or opportunities for learning, right? So today, if this was an event that it was organized by me, right? I am really grateful that the Resistance School is inviting me. But if I lived here in Cambridge and I was organizing a campaign, I'll probably make an ask of each one of you to give me your contact information so I can follow up later, right? And I can meet with you or I can connect with you, right? So relationship building could start in a place like a meeting or an event like this, right? The second way, it's a one-on-one, kind of like what Goyo did, right? This is not a sequence, by the way. I could have a one-on-one the first time I met you, just like Goyo did, but I could also follow up from an event, right? Or I could follow up from someone who gave me your contact information and say, hey, I'm Luis. Danielle gave me your information, and I just wanted to reach out because she said that you were a great and inspiring speaker for our event, right? I want to meet with you. The third one is what some people call house meetings or events organized by volunteers. They could be campus meetings, right? They could be house meetings. They could be sometimes events organized in a coffee shop. But there are smaller, more intimate conversations that are organized by one person. And that one person reaches out to their networks, right? To their people. There's something I call community wells. Community wells, it's a concept that I've always thought about since I started community organizing. Then what I always thought about is, you know, in the old days, communities used to have wells where people came to for nourishing, cleaning, right? For the chance to get water for watering their plants or watering their food. And one thing, or for cooking, and one thing that I always thought about is what's happening in nowadays? Where are our community wells, right? Where are places where we come together to discuss things, to negotiate things, to plan together? These community wells are places that sometimes I feel we have to create. I sometimes say there are community wells that are privatized and there's someone in front of them that they don't give you access to it, right? Sometimes these wells are dirty and nobody wants to drink that water. And sometimes those wells are amazing community centers or places that allow you to nourish, to connect with others, to share experiences and cultures. A lot of this is design, by the way. One of the great examples of this, it's actually the work that happened in the beginning of the 20th century, when community organizers started realizing that workers were mistreated, and some of them were working along assembly lines next to each other, and that they had relationships that were private, but that they could become public, right? So what they started doing is that they started holding meetings, some of them called back-of-the-yard meetings, right? These types of meetings were organized by a great organizer a lot of people know named Salalinsky. But there's also many others like Bob Roberts and others who were already organizing, bringing people together, right? The power of those relationships, they were able to get things done, right? So the power of relationships has always been used to advance social causes. But what's particularly special about this time of our history is that a methodology started becoming real. People started writing down ways to actually have one-on-ones effectively. People started writing down ways to host house meetings effectively and create a curriculum that now we still use. I mean, a good example of that is Cesar Chavez. Anybody knows that Cesar Chavez actually started organizing because Fred Ross, the gentleman who's in this picture, came to his house and had a meeting with him, a one-on-one. The thing that he didn't know was that Cesar Chavez invited all his brothers and sat him around him, and he said, if I touch my ear, please kick out this white boy from my living room. He said that. He said, if I scratch my ear, please kick him out, because he might be here to do something bad. Because they were eerie from people who would come to their neighborhood and try to always promise them things, say that they were going to do something. show up to the neighborhood and say, I'm going to change the way that you live. And then like months later, they will get something out of them and then walk away. There's an example of a bunch of researchers from California showed up to the Sal Si Puedes community where Cesar Chavez was, did a bunch of research, interviews, they walked away. They never came back to share the findings of what they found about the community. So they were eerie. And when Fred Ross came, they were also eerie about him. So Fred Ross was such a great organizer that convinced Cesar Chavez to actually join him in creating structures for organizing farm workers. And one thing that Cesar Chavez did that is really powerful is that he created this neighbor-to-neighbor model for people to organize each other. He would drive around the community, have one-on-ones, host meetings, and build relationships across cultures. We've all heard this clap, the farm worker clap, right? It wasn't actually created by Cesar Chavez, but it was a method for people to shut up when meetings were started. The Obama campaign did something phenomenal. They utilized one-on-ones, house meetings, these same structures of community building to organize electorally, which is something that was pretty new. I mean, there were over 1 million volunteers across the country in this campaign. They needed some structure, and that structure was created by having one-on-ones, having house meetings, and creating teams by neighborhoods, right? All of this by relationship building. Again, people came because of the candidate, but they kept coming back because of the people. That is a very important thing. One-on-one conversations are one way that we can build relationships again. And that's the one we're going to focus on today. Because for me, it's the bread and butter of an organizer's work. I always thought, now that since the organizer-in-chief Obama became really popular, people like to say that they are community organizers. And I always ask them, when was the last time you had a one-on-one? And if they're like, if they can tell me with certainty that it was yesterday or the day before that, I am always doubting if this person is truly organizing. Because one-on-ones is the bread and butter, are the bread and butter of organizing. That's when you get to connect to build relationships. I identified 3 ways for having one-on-ones. One of them is connecting. So the initial introductory one-on-one is connecting. The second one is a check-in. And the third one is what I call empowering. This is a methodology that is utilized by many, many people. The PICO network, for example, in California uses these types of one-on-ones as well. They all have a different function. And today we're actually going to go through each one of them. What they look like, what they feel like, and how are they done. But one last thing I want to add is that I also believe that the power of one-on-ones has to continue evolving. Let me give you an example. The other day, I was at a protest. I don't know if you remember that President Trump came to Phoenix to pardon Arpaio. He actually pardoned him later. But to pardon Arpaio, and we did a big rally in Phoenix to protest his visit. During that time, when we were in that space, there was an organizer who was trying to get people to have a conversation with her about the building of this freeway that will go through tribal community lands. So they are trying to push back against the building of this bridge of the freeway. I didn't know anything about this. And she did something that I didn't know, something that we can start doing more often now. She said, hey, Luis, nice to meet you. She told me, you know, I saw you earlier, and I saw that you were actually in charge of the cleanup and trash collection. So I wanted to ask you if we could talk a little bit about this issue that is happening in my community. And I said, yeah, sure, let's schedule. Here's my email, right? Like I just was trying to say it for later. She's like, no, let's talk right now. Do you have 15 minutes? And I was like, oh my God. So I said, okay, let's talk while we wait, right? So I said, all right, let's do it. And she actually had a one-on-one with me right there at the protest. She started asking me questions. And when I was like, after about 10 minutes, I realized I was having a one-on-one with her. I was being organized. And I realized it because she started asking open-ended questions about me and my interest and the way that I identify with my Native American, or in this case, with my indigenous roots. It was a very interesting conversation that really opened up my eyes to even this identity that I've always carried with me, which is, I am part Yaqui. What does that mean? So I started asking her those questions. She's like, you should come to one of our ceremonies and learn more about it. I was like, of course. So this is the way that in these times of resistance, we're having to figure out how to organize. We used to have the privilege of having weeks to have a one-on-one or follow-up. We're having to do it much faster, with much more urgency, and in much more creative ways than we used to. Our methods of organizing in the past are the basis and the roots, the fundamentals of the organizing of today, but we had to get more efficient. We had to be better. We had to be faster. We also had to be better at inclusivity. We had to learn more about how to include more voices. We had to analyze our stuff. So like, I am doing something that I used to not do, which is analyze the people that I'm meeting with. Am I really meeting with the people who are most impacted, or am I just meeting with people who are saying yes? If I'm always meeting with people who are saying yes, then I'm not building a real movement. I'm just talking to a bunch of activists. What I need is to build a movement of the people who are the most impacted. Am I really meeting with those people? Am I actually helping recruit leaders from those communities? Am I helping train people from those communities? So I'm looking at data more often now than I used to look at those things. One of the things about one-on-ones, in particularly, we're going to start with the Connect one-on-one. One thing that this amazing organizer did in Phoenix is that she asked me a lot of questions, just like Goyo did. I call it the 10-70-20 rule, or 10-70-20 practice. I always say, if in a one-on-one, I spend a lot of the time talking, that is not an effective one-on-one. So what I always say is, the 10 and the 20% are mine. The 70% is the other person. Now this is flexible, okay? I also have seen organizers that I'm coaching that put out a chronometer and actually start measuring, and I'm like, no. You gotta pay attention to the meeting, right? Like, you don't be there trying to count seconds and minutes, like that's not the point. The point is here to think, am I actually doing most of the talking or most of the listening? So in the first 10% that I always start with, it's the 10% when I'm going to share a little bit about myself and the conversation we're going to have. So I always like to sit down and start talking about, this is what we're going to talk about today. Have you ever had a meeting where you sit down with a person and they start talking and you never know what they want? Have you ever been there? We're like, say 10 minutes, 20 minutes in, you're like, where are they going? Are they going to ask me something, right? This happens often. And I hate those meetings because I don't know where they're taking me, right? So that 10% is for the person to know what you're doing. So I usually start by saying, this is my name. This is the reason why I wanted to meet with you. This is what we're going to cover, right? And I explain those things so the person can actually have an understanding of where we're going in the conversation. The second 70% for me is the meat of the conversation, the most important piece. The 70% should be focused on asking open-ended questions. So what I always say is, that is where you learn the most about the person. We're going to practice a few of those questions, actually, and we're going to go through some of those pieces. And the final piece is the 20%, which I think is the ask and explanation. In the last part of the conversation, you try to bring the person's self-interest. You try to find their self-interest and bring it to the current work that you're doing. So like Goyo, when we sat down and he said, I want to learn more about immigrant students being in the university, what he wanted to do basically was to teach me that there were other people like me on campus who were suffering from the mistreatment of their employer. I didn't know that. But he didn't say, oh, pobrecitos workers, you know, like you need to learn about these workers. He didn't say that. He didn't victimize the workers. He told me, like, you come here every day. How does it feel to see your brothers and sisters in the cafeteria? He pushed me. He asked me questions. And it made me elevate my conscience. It made me also think about the fact that I was a worker just like the workers that were in my cafeteria. I was working in a catering company, and I had to work very long hours every day, and I had to come to school. So he was like, same with the workers. I work here too, have a family. And on the way, I also train and organize workers in this company. So that 20% at the end, when he made the ask, I remember very clearly he told me, you speak Spanish. There are very few students here who speak Spanish and can connect with these workers. I would love for you to come to the meeting that we're having so you can talk to the workers. I was like, yes, I felt helpful, right? I was like, yes, the one thing that I am here in this country for to learn English. They're actually asking me to speak Spanish. Yes. I went. I showed up to the meeting because I knew I had a purpose. Okay? Because he knew how to tie my self-interest to the conversation. We're going to start with the relationship building, with the connect piece of the conversation. The first thing is connecting using your story. How many of you participated in Marshall Gant's training on narrative of story of self? A few of you. Oh, great. It's the follow-up of the class. One of the most powerful things that has happened in my life is to actually have these 3 words in my pocket. Challenge, choice, and outcome. Which is the way that Marshall Gant says we can develop our personal narratives, our stories of self, right? I always think about what is the challenge, what is the choice, what is the outcome, right? And I put them in my pocket. And one thing that I say when you start a one-on-one, you should think about those 3 things before the one-on-one, and hopefully be able to share your story with the person. Tell them why you're there. Tell them why you're doing this work. One very important thing is to also get to know the person. Check in about how they're doing. There's nothing I hate more than when I sit down with on a one-on-one and the person is like, let's cut to the chase. I'm like, hold on. Like, let's talk a little bit. Okay? There we get sometimes to be very robotic when we are having one-on-ones and we think it's like this is a formula, it's A, B, C. No. We have to make sure that we check in with the person. The other day, for example, I sat down on a one-on-one with a mother in Phoenix. And the first question I asked was, how are you doing today? She said, I'm not doing so well. I said, why? She said, this is the statement. She said, I lost my son to the system. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, my son, at 14 years old, entered the juvenile justice system. He just came out at 24 after going in and going out of the system at 24. And he just got arrested again. And I think this time I'm not getting him back. That's the way we started the one-on-one. Imagine that. Imagine if I would have said, let me tell you what I want to talk about, right? That would have been a huge mistake on my part. So you have to genuinely care about the person. So I asked, tell me more about this, right? I learned that she was an amazing, amazing activist in the school of her son, and that her schools always pushed her away because she was a loud voice and advocacy for her son. I learned that she was disenchanted from organizations and community organizing because she's done it before and she was burned out. I learned that her son was still in detention and that she didn't have an attorney. So I was able to try to find an attorney to offer that help to her. That conversation reminded me again of getting to know the person. There are times that people ask me, what are the questions I should be asking? If I'm giving you a list of questions, then we're not having a real conversation. You're interviewing the person, right? It's very important to get to know the person genuinely. Be genuine. Listen actively. How many of you have had a person in front of you who's asking you questions and they can make eye contact because they're thinking about what they're going to ask you next, right? Or they're writing down everything that you're saying. I actually have always a notebook with me when I am having a one-on-one, but I only write the reminders. A word, a thing, but I don't write full sentences. The reason is because I need to be listening to the person. And one thing that I have a hard time is writing and listening, on my case, right? So if you're great at that, you should do it. But one of the things that I always say is you have to actively listen. What I mean is listen to the person fully. And then don't be thinking about the next question. That next question will arrive in the next one. Also, facilitate the conversation. I am coaching an organizer right now who every time she has a one-on-one with someone, she walks away organized. What I mean by that is the other person organizes her. So they sit down and the other person might say, oh, I work in a campaign. She's like, oh, really? And what is that campaign? And then she's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to volunteer with you tonight. So I'm always like, yeah, but we're working together to create a movement. It's great for you to volunteer and support each other. That's great. But you have to facilitate a conversation. Ask open-ended questions and listen. start statements with I am, right? Or what is your favorite thing, right? I sometimes ask people, for example, whatever is happening. If I was meeting tonight with someone and the World Series are happening, then I will be asking, do you like baseball, right? Are you watching it or not, or stuff like that, right? But later in the self-interest, one question that we always want to ask people is, why do you decide to meet with me today? That's a very important question, because people taking time away from their day to meet with you, it's a very big deal, okay? You shouldn't take it lightly. It's a huge privilege that people are giving you their time. So I always ask them, why do you decide to meet with me today? That is the way that I find out more about their interests. Well, because I wanted to learn more about this campaign, or because I wanted to learn more about the work you're doing, or because I wanted to share more about X or Y. In the self-interest part, you might say, what is the biggest concern you have right now? Let me give you an example about this. This is going to sound a little ridiculous, but right after the election last year, I had a one-on-one with someone. And when I said, what is your biggest concern right now? She said something that really broke my heart. And she said, right after the current president got elected, my son asked me, by the way, she's a Mexican immigrant. Both her and her son are here as immigrants from Mexico. And she said, will the same thing that happened to Jewish people happen to us, Mom? When she said that to me, it was the most heartbreaking thing someone has ever told me, because I was like, how could you fathom that? How is that in your imagination, right? But it wasn't the kid's imagination. So my comeback to that was, how did that make you feel? Tell me more. When she started telling me about that, she started choking up. I started choking up. And the conversation became a lot more about the things that we could do together to fight back, right? Because it was an open-ended question. It was something about learning more about the person. She is now really involved in local campaigns in Nevada and doing a lot more work to fight back. The last one is ask about power. So explore their understanding of power. What I mean by that is, how do you do to make sure that the person understands who is in charge to make decisions? Right? So we talked about the first 10% was to do what? By the way, the first 10% is to do what? I didn't hear you? Relationship building. The first part of the 10% of the conversation, relationship building. What is your favorite coffee? What do you like to order here? Right? The second part, the 70%, it's called what? The self-interest. Try to find the person's self-interest by asking open-ended questions and getting to the root, right, of what are the concerns of the person and the motivations. The last one is make an ask. So connect self-interest to work, right? So how does the work intersect with their interest? So if we're working on something, just like this mother told me about their fear of her son, the first thing I asked is how can we fight that back, right? Do you understand the power that we have as communities? We sometimes forget. One example is that once I asked a group of mothers, mostly immigrant mothers from Central America, to describe power to me. You know what they did? Is that power for them was mostly a bunch of male figures. So they describe and name people in their community that had a lot of power. And I was shocked by it because it's not the same understanding I had of power. So we started having a conversation about what power was and what power meant. So how do we intersect the work with their self-interest? It's the best way to go about it, and not just to trying to take down things. The second thing is carry 3 asks in your pocket. So remember, I always say I always carry 3 asks in my pocket. It's usually having options. So I usually say, can you come to this thing? Can you host this thing? Can you volunteer in this thing? Okay? So those are usually the 3 asks that I have in my pocket. So if I run into you in the streets in Phoenix and you say, hey, Luis, how are you? I'm here for 2 weeks. How can I help? I'm going to pull out one of those 3 asks and ask you in order that are of importance. Okay? So for example, I have a training this Saturday called Black Students Matter, that it's about the rights of African American students in schools. So I need more people to show up to this training. So my first ask might be, can you come to this training? The second ask might be, can you connect me with people who can come to this training? And if you're really excited, I'm going to say, can you come and volunteer for the training as well, right? I always have options in my pocket. Always have options. And I always have 3 asks to make. Give options, but don't be rigid. If the person says, I don't have anything on those 3 things, I'm not available, ask the person, what can you do? I had a one-on-one about 5 months ago where the person told me, no, I can't participate, I can't do this, but I run a small youth theater group. What if I produce a theater show about this? And I said, all right, let's talk about it. Well, the theater show is being produced and it's coming out in March. And it's going to be about the work that I'm doing on the campaign to eliminate injustices in the education system. That's why you have to be flexible. There are talents out there that we're not utilizing. I always say, if campaigns are not engaging artists, we're not actually running a campaign. The last one is be direct on the ask. So make sure that you ask directly. Explain what you're working on. Why is this important? Why is it important that they get involved? And why is it important now? When Goyo and I had a one-on-one, he said that they were working on a campaign to make sure that the workers of the cafeteria had a living wage. He said that that was important because so many of them had families, and they were sometimes the only breadwinners, and they couldn't actually afford to have a proper life. He said that it was important that I got involved because I spoke Spanish and I could actually connect with the workers better than a lot of the other volunteers of the campaign. And finally, he said, we're having a meeting with the school president who we've been asking for a meeting for months. This is the first time he gave us a meeting. It's a very important meeting. Can you come? All of those things together made it super urgent for me to show up. So every time you're going to make an ask, think about these things to make an ask. By the way, does the ask of your friends, ask of your volunteers, ask of your people you want to get involved? This framework helps on everything from fundraising to making asks about campaign. Finally, just ask. Goyo said, can you come on Wednesday to the meeting with the president at 6 p.m.? I said yes, right? He didn't say, maybe I was thinking that if you could, maybe we're available, you could probably come. No. That's like what we call a soft ask. A hard ask is direct. Can you come on Wednesday at 6 p.m. To the meeting with the president? A soft ask would be, maybe I was thinking that if you were available on on Wednesday at 6, maybe you could come. Are you available? That's not a hard ask. This is the structure that I always call the HWs. How, what, why them, and why now, right? The answers to a question, to an ask, are usually 3, okay? Yes. Who likes when people say yes? All of us, right? Who likes when people say maybe? I hate maybes. They are my worst enemy. Maybes, we don't like maybes, okay? Never. Maybes make us lose our time. Make us waste our time because people here right now in this society, we actually are trained to not say no. We cannot say no. So we usually say maybe instead of no. And guess what? As an organizer, I might be like, oh, okay, that's a maybe. So I have 26 maybes, 4 yeses, and 40 no's, right? Or sometimes 3 no's. I always say the maybes are worse than the no. So what I try to say is to take a person to a yes or a no. I actually tell people sometimes that. Look, maybes don't help me much. Can you just tell me, are you interested in coming? That's it. And the person sometimes says, yeah, I'm interested, but it's just that I can't do it right now. Great. That is a better answer, right? To tell the person no. If a person says no, they usually mean one of 3 things. Not now, which means, no, I can't do that right now, right? So what is the answer that we should give if they say not now? When. Then when, right? So not now. The second one is not that. So if I said, if Goyo asked me to show up to the president's meeting, and that was overwhelming for me. Oh my God, the president of the university. Oh, what if they kick me out of the school, right? What if I said no? No, I'm busy, maybe no, right? Because I can't. And what if Goyo said, why not? And I said, well, I'm scared of showing up because I might get kicked out of the university. Well, that means not that, right? But I'm still interested. So what would you say if I said not that? Then what? Then what, right? So can you come to this other thing, right? And the third one is not ever. I love not evers, by the way. I love them more than I love maybes. Because when someone says not ever, I'm not interested, I'm not going to waste my time there anymore. The more direct you are, the easier the person gets it, right? So it's a yes or no answer. So check-in type, the one-on-ones for check-ins, there are usually 4 types of check-in one-on-ones. The first one is training. So you might have a check-in one-on-one with a person to train them on something. Or if I ask you to host a house meeting, I might sit down with you and train you on how to plan that one-on-one, okay? The second one is strategy. One-on-ones where you sit down to strategize for something. So I just had a one-on-one like that with a community organizer in Phoenix. She works in behavioral health, and I want to put an event together about the impact of behavioral health and trauma on students. So I asked her, can you host this event? And she said yes. So we got together and planned who we're going to come, who we're going to invite, etc. So we strategized. The third one is debriefing. This is one of the most important check-ins. Why do you think we do debriefs after every event? Why should we do a debrief? So to improve our practice, right? You also can follow up on next steps after the debrief. So from the things that come out of the debrief, if the person said, yeah, you know what? I wish that I could have actually invited the volunteers to come earlier instead of that time. So I realized this person is actually good volunteer management, right? Well, that's a great idea. Can you handle that piece of the volunteering next week? Can you actually take over that next Saturday, right? So that's a great way to delegate as well, doing debriefs. The fourth one is report backs. So one thing that I usually like to do with volunteers that I work with is that I connect them with other organizations or efforts. And I usually say, let's have a one-on-one so you can report back. I, as an organizer, can't be in every table and every meeting, right? So what I usually do is that I try to work with leaders and community members so they can represent or be the voices in the tables or other organizations. So I always have one-on-ones to report back when they say the meeting went this way, these people showed up, this is what I think we should do next, right? So report backs are also very, very important. Every single event in this world, be my birthday party or be a rally for the most amazing candidate in the world with 1 million people showing up, have those three elements: turnout, agenda, and logistics. We're going to start with turnout because turnout is the most important one and it's the hardest one, okay? Usually the agenda we can figure out. If we don't have an agenda before we plan the event, by the way, that's a big red flag, right? So usually it's what is the agenda, what is the goal, right? What is the turnout goal? It's a really important thing. And then the logistics are the last part. Organizers so very often spend the most of their time in logistics. And that is a huge flag. The reason is because it's the thing that is more black and white. I know that if I ask for translation devices, I'm going to have the translation devices. I can have signing sheets printed, right? It's everything I'm under control. Turnout, we are not in full control of, right? So often, actually, people think they're my friends. They're going to show up, right? Well, the truth is that even your friends are flakes. Okay? Even your friends are flakes. And I always say that to people. Even your friends are flakes. They will not show up because of many reasons. Not because they don't want to see you, but because something came up. And that's normal. When I am in a situation like this one, by the way, I usually try to compensate with the person to do a little bit of organizing and actually follow up. I put a calendar reminder and say, how is it going? Did you make the calls? I text them, so I am often checking in with them, even if that already happened. So we're going to do the last piece, which is empower. The section of a check-in, an empower check-in, an empower one-on-one, an empower one-on-one, the goal is to ask the person to take one more responsibility, to take more responsibility, okay? How do we do that? Well, we do it by getting on the right mindset. So one of the things that I always say is, if I'm going to ask someone to take more responsibility and the person says no, it's not because of me, okay? I'm going to say that again. If a person says no, it's not because of me. I always say, social change, it's our responsibility. And if a person wants to take it and the person sees it and they want to jump on it and be active, that's great, that's amazing. And if they don't, it's okay too, okay? Because to be honest, not 100% of our society is ready to jump and be active, right? Not 100% of our society is ready to fight resistance or to show up. And that's okay. We need to increase the numbers, right? And we need to be more effective at the way we ask. We have to be more urgent at the way we ask, like the framework I gave you earlier. But we have to get in the right mindset. If someone says no, I'm not going to walk out of there feeling defeated, because I'm like, okay, that was an opportunity for the person to get involved. And I truly believe that, because I get a lot of no's in my work, right? And if every no I take it personally, I will be crying in my car all day, which happens sometimes. But sometimes I cry in my car because I know that I messed up in the one-on-one. It was my fault, not because the person didn't see it, right? So it's very important. Get on the right mindset. The second one is be clear on the role. What are you asking the person to do? So one thing that I always like to ask the person to do is to be clear on this is what I'm asking you to do. One good example is, oh, that was a great idea. Giving feedback on the way that we did signing. Can you take over signing next week? It's a great way of elevating the person's leadership, right? Or for example, every time I have an event, I open the event with a personal story, with a story of self, every time. And it's never me. As an organizer, I always ask new people to practice their story of self. So a good way to do it is at events. So I always train new people to do that, right? So be clear on the role. I want you to share your story. Is that all right? Tell the person why the role matters. That is a very important thing. So many times we ask a person to take more responsibility and we just say, it's just the things that need to happen right now. We don't say why. Do you know how powerful it is to someone to say, hey, I have very little capacity. I had to meet with 100 people and I really need someone to pick up the translation devices and be in charge of translation. Can you be in charge of translation on Saturday? That is way more empowering than, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to have time. Can you go on Saturday? Are you available? Right? That is not enough information for the person. They need to know why. Provide examples of how leadership looks like in execution, how leadership looks like when they are doing it. So if you're asking someone for signing sheet, just like you did on Saturday, you took over the signing table and you did a great job, that is a great way to do that. Provide examples of the way that their role looks like. Oh, we also have some don'ts. No. Don't push too hard. If the person doesn't want to do something, don't push them to do it. Okay? There are so many organizers that push the person so hard that the person ends up saying yes, but they hate it, and they quit 2 days later. That's horrible. Don't push too hard. Push enough for like when the person to say, this is why I'm doing it, but don't push too hard. Leave without pushing is the other one. So if the person says no, maybe that no is what? Not what? No. Not now? Or not that. Not that. And finally, not ever. Not ever, right? So the first one is not? No. Not now. Second one? Not that. And the third one? Not ever. Not ever. Great. Ask for something you wouldn't do. You never ask for something you wouldn't do. Ever, ever, ever. Never tell someone, can you help me with parking? Because I hate doing parking, by the way. But I do it all the time because it's the one thing I hate. So I do it to model too, right? Like go and have to say where the cars are going to go first and where's the overflow if there's overflow and where they're going to get out and where are the signs and stuff like that for an event or a one-on-one where I'm talking with someone and say, can you take over parking? And the person is like, I've never done that. Well, me neither. That's horrible. Never ask for something you wouldn't do yourself. Okay? And if you haven't done it, try it first, and then you ask, because that's the first thing that you're going to do as an organizer. Try to be a little bit ahead. Don't ask too soon. So very often we have a one-on-one with a person, the first one-on-one, and we're already saying, can you be a team leader? Like, that's difficult for the first conversation. I always say, try to ask the person to do something first. Because there are a lot of overcommitted people like me in the world. How many of you, every time someone says something, you say yes? How many of you say yes to everything? I am the yes person, right? And it's horrible. I'm trying to work on it, right? But in reality, there are a lot of yes people in the world. And that's what happens. All yes people are so stretched that we can't do it all, right? So one thing I always say is when people ask me, instead of saying yes now, I usually say, can you give me one thing to do first, right? It's the same thing I do in organizing. I give the person one thing to do. It might be signing. It might be show up. It might be volunteering. But that one thing to do will show me if the person has followed through. Because if we are always asking in the first one-on-one for people to be elevated, to be catapulted to the next level, you know what happens? You're always recruiting the most charismatic people. You're always recruiting the people who you like the most, and not the people who actually are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. One thing that I want to do is actually think about the concepts that we walked through, right? One thing that I said is that we were going to learn about the different types of one-on-ones, right? Do you remember the different types of one-on-ones? Can you shout them at me really loud? Connect. What are Connect one-on-ones about? What are Connect one-on-ones about? Can someone tell me? What are Connect one-on-ones about? figure out their self-interest and make an ask, right? What about the second type of one-on-one? What is the second type of one-on-one?
Check-in.
Huh?
Check-in.
What is the check-in one-on-one? What do you do?
There's 4 types.
Mm-hmm.
Training, strategy, debrief, and report back.
Wow, can you give him a round of applause? That's great. And then what's the last type of one-on-one that exists? What is the last type? Empower?
Power.
And what is that one about?
Asking somebody to take on more responsibility.
All right. Asking someone to take more responsibility for the campaign, right? Not just like to help you, but to help the campaign or the effort. All right. What are some takeaways from today's information? What did you learn? What is something that it wasn't an aha moment or something that you were excited about learning or reflecting on? Anybody? Did we learn something today? Yeah? There's a hand here. Okay, let's go.
Be direct.
Be direct. How can you be direct?
You can state clearly what you need from people and make it obvious for them so that they can give you a yes or no, and you can figure out if they're a yes or no.
I'm so glad you say that, because to be honest, we sometimes think that being direct is like being salesy or like selling something, right? Like, to be honest, put yourself on the other side. When someone is direct, it's much easier to respond, right? So be direct for the sake of the other person, right? It's like something I always say, making the ask, it's like 3 seconds of being uncomfortable. Can you do this? The rest of the 45 minutes are great. So just get over those 3 seconds and do it well, do it right, practice, and then the rest is going to be beautiful, right? All right, we were going to go with another one. What is another takeaway? That side, next.
Just the importance of doing debriefs or postmortems, because I think a lot of times we do actions and then we just forget, we go and we move on to the next thing. We don't actually take a look and try to figure out what best practice was, what worked, what didn't. That's really just super, super critical on any of these things.
Relationship building, it's a lot about debriefing too. It's about asking the person, what do you think, what do you learn, how can we do better, right? So the relationship continues improving. We haven't heard from you. What is a takeaway from today? I'm going to ask for someone. Yes, we're going to go over there. What is your takeaway?
I think a takeaway is that one-on-ones build on skills we all have, if we're organizers or not, that it's putting that structure into place, but knowing people's interests, being friendly, and knowing how to support each other for the benefit of the campaign.
That is so beautiful. One-on-ones are about building relationships. It's about listening to each other, being genuine. And that is at the end of the day what we have to do in this work. There's so much pain in this world right now. But there's also so much hope. People want change. People want to do things. People want to improve these communities. And if we only meet and we only talk, but we don't really get to solutions, we don't really get to power, we don't really get to action, then every conversation is just a reminder of our pain. We can't just have conversations for therapy, right? One-on-ones are not about therapy. They're good reminders. They're good conversations. But they're about getting to solutions, getting to action, giving hope, starting fires. Organizers are fire starters. And every time we have a conversation with someone, it's a great privilege. If you use it as a privilege, if you use it as an opportunity to change someone's trajectory, to change this world and do it better, then you know that the one-on-one is that important. And you take it seriously. Then you ask the right questions. Then you make the right ask. Then you do the follow-up. And you treat the person with the respect that they deserve. The last thing I'm going to say about one-on-ones and relationship building is we cannot make assumptions about anything. When we meet with someone, if we have a preconceived notion or an assumption of that person, we are taking their power away to decide. So if at the end you say, I'm not going to make an ask because that person's too busy, I'm not going to make an ask because this person seems to not want to, you are taking their power away to make a decision in their lives. You are oppressing them in a way. Assumptions are a way of disempowerment. And if we don't truly believe that, then we go around our lives deciding who has the ability to change the world and who doesn't. And that's not our job. Our job is to give everyone the opportunity to change the world and to change their communities, to be the leaders they need to be. I want to thank you today for the opportunity. I was sharing with someone earlier that when I was in Mexico and I was little, I told my mom that I was going to go to Harvard, and I'm here. So I'm really excited that I'm here with you. It's a great honor and a great privilege. We couldn't do this at a better time. We have to fight. This tension, this thing we feel around the country right now about fighting for our rights, well, it might seem too new, seem new to you, some of us. It's not new. In Arizona, we've been fighting raids. We've been fighting Arpaio for the last 20-something years. We've had laws that allow for people to be racially profiled on the streets. Speaking Spanish in the classroom is against the law. I mean, there are horrible policies that we've been living. And when the election happened, well, I couldn't stop crying and I couldn't stop feeling about this sense of powerlessness. I was reminded when a volunteer told me, welcome to Arizona, the United States. Welcome to the oppression we felt for years. We've won. We got rid of Arpaio. Pardon or no pardon, that guy is out. We overturned 1070. We've elected a new cadre of amazing leaders. We have more community organizations and power than we've ever had. We are a microcosm of what's happening to the rest of the country. We will prevail because we are on the right side of history. And each one of us has a responsibility. There's no one here to save us but ourselves. This country is going to change with individual actions from each one of us moving this country forward.